Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear Defense Secretary, and since yesterday, by now, my good friend, Commander of the Sri Lankan Army, Honorable Mr. Gupta, Deputy National Security Advisor of India, my brother, Commander of the Royal Saudi Land Forces, governors, secretaries, the Sri Lankan services chiefs, military officers, my fellow civilians, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When I received a very kind letter from President Sirisena, I was delighted that God gave me one more opportunity to visit Sri Lanka, a country so close to my heart. As the announcer of the program earlier said, indeed, it can be the most beautiful country in the world. From its lovely nature to this magnificent culture and heritage. You must have all seen it while arriving in Sri Lanka, in the welcome of the people and the colorfulness of this culture. So I'm very, very happy, my Sri Lankan brothers and sisters, that I am once again honored to be in your country. And thank you very, very much for the tremendous hospitality as always. I have been to Sri Lanka many times before. First time in 1993 as the then Deputy Foreign Minister to attend the funeral of President Premadasa, if I'm not mistaken. It was a time of conflict. And again in 2008 to visit as the President of Afghanistan to attend the SAARC conference as we were nearing the end of conflict in Sri Lanka. And then again last year as a state guest of the Sri Lankan people and government in April of 2014, and two, very luckily, very happily for me and also surely for the people of Sri Lanka, to see the change in 5 years since the establishment of peace towards prosperity, growth, and the improvement of infrastructure. That made me very, very happy because I came also from a country that was troubled, vexed, and almost destroyed in terms of its infrastructure and well-being by conflict and intervention. So I once again express my happiness at peace here. I hope it will be eternal, and for the prosperity and well-being that has followed the establishment of peace in this lovely country of ours. Ladies and gentlemen, when someone comes from Afghanistan, of course you don't expect him to speak about the United States or Europe or some other part of the world. I'll be speaking about Afghanistan mostly, and then relating Afghanistan also to events in the world. And the story for us should begin from 1978. Afghanistan before that, before 1978, was like any other country, small country, relatively small country, on the way to progress, gaining more education, expanding its middle class, giving roots to its civil services, getting better trained army and police forces, We were a poor country, somehow an isolated country, but a country definitely on the way to be a more developed country and enjoyed immense peace and stability. In 1978, there was the communist coup in Afghanistan, which overthrew a presidential system, which then invited, of course, the rivalry of the then two superpowers of the world, the United States of America and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies. This resulted for the Soviet Union, in order to keep its allies, the communists, in power in Afghanistan, to invade Afghanistan. That invasion, in turn, caused the Afghan people to wage a struggle for their independence and to leave the country because of war in millions for migration to our two big neighbors, Pakistan and Iran, and also the more educated ones of us, nearly 500,000 of them, to Europe and America and Australia later on. Now, while we were, as the Afghan people, waging a struggle for our independence against the former Soviet Union, we saw two extremely superimposing situations come upon the Afghan people. One, the effort of the former Soviet Union to impose socialism and communism as an ideology on the Afghan people so as to neutralize the opposition to it. And also then as the seekers of independence by the Afghan people, and as we migrated to Pakistan, and as we began to be supported by the United States and Pakistan and their allies, the imposition of another type of extremism of the right on the Afghan people. So Afghanistan became a conflict ground of two competing political motivations, the leftist inclination and the rightist inclination. The consequence of that for Afghanistan was disastrous. While we were happy to be trying to free ourselves, we also saw that those that invaded us and those that helped us were trying to impose their own thinking, their own interests on us. The result was an immense loss of human life, immense destruction of the Afghan social system, the infrastructure, and all that a nation holds dear. And as we all know, in situations like that, when there is an internal dynamic in a country, when there are also external players in a country, two of the essentials in any society are used: ethnicity and religion, as easy sources of promotion of interests. In case of Afghanistan, the religion was used as a very powerful tool to weaken the Soviet Union. You must have heard the political phrase of the arc of crisis, as it was initiated and labeled by political strategists, especially in the United States, to weaken and to encircle the Soviet Union. This was one of the most fundamental reasons for the spread of radicalism, religious radicalism in Afghanistan, and for bringing in radicalism into Afghanistan through the door of our good neighbor and brotherly neighbor Pakistan, to weaken the Soviet Union, to contain the Soviet Union, and then later to weaken the Soviet Union. The ability of the Afghan people to wage a successful struggle and the imposition of religious radicalism on the Afghan resistance really became a lethal force to weaken the Soviet Union and later on to cause, through, together with all other factors, the collapse of the former Soviet Union. Here, after the withdrawal of the former Soviet Union, while we were happy to be liberated from the Soviet invasion and occupation, we also saw the extremely negative consequences of the absence of the former Soviet Union as a neighbor of ours. An immense vacuum was created. The United States lost its interest for a while in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. It left the region and left Afghanistan to the aspirations of our neighbors and to the use of religious radicalism as a most important instrument for influence in Afghanistan and beyond. This also caused Afghanistan to go into a serious, extremely damaging internal conflict. The internal conflict, in turn, also added more fire and fuel to the use of radicalism in Afghanistan by forces close to us and by forces far beyond Afghanistan. This caused the complete collapse of the state system in Afghanistan. This caused the complete collapse of institutional order in Afghanistan, especially the collapse of our armed forces and of our police forces and of our governmental structure. Looting, insecurity, anarchy of the highest order prevailed in Afghanistan. In this situation, a force called the Taliban emerged in Afghanistan. A force that was also present in the Afghan resistance against the former Soviet Union. A morally better grounded force in Afghanistan would appeal to the Afghan people, and that force emerged in the name of restoring order in Afghanistan, which we all joined. I was one of the people who joined this force, hoping that Afghanistan, in their hands, will be a more peaceful, a more secure country. For a while, that worked. They established peace in Afghanistan, they established order in Afghanistan, but then, unfortunately, the Taliban too began to be influenced heavily by our neighbors and by players far from Afghanistan for their own political reasons. This caused an internal conflict again in Afghanistan, and this caused massive intervention from outside, both as the Honorable Defense Secretary and the Army Chief mentioned. The emergence of non-state actors was at its highest in Afghanistan at that time, resulting in the spread of radicalism and terrorism, and especially what we describe now, the emergence of Al-Qaeda and other related terrorist networks in Afghanistan and beyond, into Pakistan, into our neighborhood in the Middle East and our brotherly Arab countries. Eventually, in the bringing about of the tragedy of September 11 in the United States, in New York and in Washington. While all of this was going on in Afghanistan, we, the Afghan people, were constantly active in trying to bring in the support of the West and of our neighbors towards the resolution of the Afghan problem. Because of the lack of interest in them, this did not happen. September 11 suddenly invited this massive attention of the international community to Afghanistan and of the universality of cooperation towards Afghanistan. The consequence of that was that with the arrival of the United States and its NATO allies, Afghanistan was liberated within a month and a half from the rule of the Taliban, from the presence of Al-Qaeda, and indeed, the presence of the United States and the arrival of the United States in NATO and its allies from the Muslim world and also from the rest of the world, including China, India, Iran, and everybody else, brought to us, the Afghan people, the liberation of our country. We joined hands wholeheartedly with this effort from the international community, and Afghanistan moved towards prosperity and security, the opening up of our society, democracy, a constitution, massive return of education to Afghanistan, and infrastructure building, the result of which was a booming economy in Afghanistan, and the result of which today is the arrival into our country of our own youth, educated and prospering. On the other side, unfortunately, on the other side, unfortunately, the use of non-state actors with their ability to perpetrate violence and the use of religion again as an instrument of foreign policy in our neighborhood, and the neglect by the United States and its allies of the goings on in our neighborhood brought immense insecurity and terrorism to Afghanistan, with consequences for America, for our other allies, with consequences for Afghanistan, and later on also with consequences for our brotherly neighbor Pakistan, where the Pakistani people too suffered immensely at the hands of terrorism that was groomed, trained, brought about, and unleashed from Pakistani territory against Afghanistan and eventually against its own people, unfortunately. The result, 13 years after this massive international campaign against terrorism, terrorism is on the rise, extremism is on the rise. We had Al-Qaeda, today we have now an added, more horrible element to it, Daesh, or what we call in English, ISIL. In my experience of the past 13 years as the president of Afghanistan, and in my dealings with world leaders, and working closely with them all these 13 years on how to bring about a solution to the problem of extremism, terrorism, and the use of religion or ethnicity as tools at the hands of those who want to use it. Violence and the use of similar methods does not bring about an end to it. In my experience, and especially in my numerous conversations with President Obama since he took office, and especially the European leaders, the conclusion on my part is that there will not be an end to extremism or terrorism unless we in the international community begin to see terrorism as a common threat to all of us. We will never be able to end terrorism if some of us find uses for it. And if others of us at times say, well, it may not be a threat to us. Eventually, it is going to be a threat to all, as it is today, emerging to be a threat to all. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the way forward? The way forward, in my opinion, is for us, the nation states. Unfortunately, the world today is comprised of nation states. We don't have an international order without borders. We are defined by borders by nation states and the interests arising from the existence of nation states. The narrow definition of national interest and then the pursuit of national interest as an end with any means available is bringing us to where we are today, including, unfortunately, the use of non-state actors as elements which will achieve our ends for us. This is amply demonstrated in Afghanistan. And I have observed it on a daily basis in my dealings with our partners in the international community and with our neighbors in Pakistan. It is impossible, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely impossible for any state actor to be active and to be able to inflict damage to any other country, society, or individual without a backup support system somewhere for that group or that person. It is impossible. It is impossible for a person to carry a gun in a country and to move miles and hundreds of miles with transportation, with food, with logistics, with the means to launch an attack without a backup system. And the backup system cannot be provided by any other source but a state organization and a state structure. So, we return to the narrow definition of the national interest. And in my view, and in very clear words, the culprit is a narrow definition of the national interest. If I want to influence a country, or promote my strategic depth in another country, or try to weaken another country, or settle scores with them, or promote what I perceive to be my interest, then I may use any means available. And the means available today, as I mentioned earlier, are ethnicity and religion. In some of us, ethnicity was used as a tool. In some of us, religiosity was used as a tool. I believe, and I believe very, very strongly, and again I must say, based on my experience of the past 13 years, from very close quarter, that the world has only two options if it wants to be free from terrorism and extremism. Only two options. There may be other options, but I'm not aware of them, and I only know two options. Option one, the return of morality to international politics. That we conduct our politics within our countries and beyond with some moral restrictions on us. What do we judge? Is it right in the pursuit of an interest to cause harm to the children of other people? If you conclude, no, it is not right, of course, that damage will not occur. Is it right to send suicide bombers to another country for the pursuit of an interest? If we judge it wrong, we will not do it. Is it right to bomb a country, a weak, poor country, in the pursuit of an interest, be it the war on terror, be it any other thing? If you conclude no, then that will not happen and the damage will not happen. So the return of moral considerations and morality in policy making and to the policy makers in the world, especially the big powers who have the means to conduct their interests through the availability of resources, immense manpower, immense technology, or non-state actors. If the return of morality is not possible today in our world order as we stand today, and if that's not going to take place, and if we don't have moral voices among us strong enough to bring this about, then I would hope very, very much that we would return to a balance of power system in international politics. The alternative is a balance of power system. When we had the Soviet Union and the United States of America with Warsaw and NATO as their two sides, at least in our part of the world, we had security and peace as a consequence of that balance of power prevalent in the world. Today, too, I hope that the United States of America and its allies in NATO would seek advice and begin to consult with three great emerging powers in the world. The Indian representative is here, Mr. Gupta. I don't know if there is a representative from China. Surely there must be someone here. And from Russia. A frank, human interest base, consultation between the United States and its allies on the one hand, and on the other hand, the three great powers emerging today, China, India, and Russia. If they see eye to eye and begin to consult on the rights and wrongs of today's world order, and begin to consult on how to end human suffering. There is immense suffering. Sri Lanka knows how it feels when you suffer. We know it in Afghanistan. The people of Iraq know it. The people of Pakistan know it in many ways. India has experienced that. China has experienced it in Xinjiang. Russia has experienced it in Chechnya and other parts. And Syria and Libya and Nigeria and other parts of the world. We will see, without a doubt, a more stable international order and less suffering for us, the lesser citizens of the world. The bigger citizens of the world have it all. They're doing very well. For countries like ours, poor, without the means, we hope either for the return of morality in world politics or a strict balance of power order in the world that will see us more secure and more stable and working. This has been a tremendous event for me to vent out my feeling and to speak to you of my experience. I'm extremely grateful, and I hope I can have an opportunity again and again to visit Sri Lanka. Please do give me excuses to come and visit you again. Thank you very, very much. Very kind of you. Thank you.